Hi, this is Ms. Hadi. I want to do a quick recap of Hinduism and Buddhism in case you didn't take ancient world history in ninth grade with me. First, Hinduism is what we call all of the religious beliefs coming from India. There's no original founder, and of course, they're very diverse. Hindus practice differently, so not all Hindus believe the same thing. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, which means there's going to be exceptions to everything that I say. Let's start with what Hindus originally focused on in terms of gods. Now, think of Hinduism as being a polytheistic religion, which means it has many gods, although some people argue that Hindus ultimately believe that all those gods are incarnations of the same divine energy, so that ultimately it's monotheistic. But if I give you a test, you're going to write down polytheistic instead of monotheistic. So early Hindus focused on the god Indra, which was a god of war, a very rambunctious god, and then later they're going to focus on the god Vishnu, which is the preserver god, the one that keeps the universe going, and Shiva, which is both the creator and the destroyer. In Hinduism, they believe that we are born and then we die again. That's called samsara. They didn't always believe that. Original Hindus were a group of people called the Aryans, and the Aryans believed originally that when you died, you either went to a sort of heaven called the world of the fathers, or you went to the subterranean house of clay, which is kind of like a hell. But after they mixed with a group called the Dravidians, they believe that no, when you die, you temporarily go to the world of the fathers, and then you're reborn or reincarnated. And you don't want to keep getting reincarnated. You want to stop having samsara. You want to eventually have your little soul mixed with the big soul and reach the spiritual liberation and something called moksha. That's the goal. In old Hinduism, to get to moksha, you had to pay priests or Brahmins to perform these animal sacrifices on your behalf, and you had to perform extreme meditation. For example, yoga is a type of extreme meditation, or extreme asceticism. So that's the pathway to moksha. But later on, Hindus, especially as they moved into more urban areas, they couldn't just leave and be extremely ascetic, give up their families, give up food, give up their jobs. So they had to find some way to think about getting to moksha, and eventually Hinduism evolved to say that you could get to moksha if you did your caste duties, which I'll explain caste in a second, or dharma without attachment. Now, Hindu ethics believe in something called the caste system. So the caste system is what the Portuguese, when they eventually visit India much later in time, call the rigid social structure that exists in India, or existed in India at that time. So at the very top, you have the Brahmins, which are the priests, and then you have the Kshatriyas, which are the soldiers, and then you have the Vaishyas, which are the merchants, and then you have the Shudras, which are the people working the land, and then eventually you have the untouchables. And your social caste or group that you belong to is determined by all you did in your past life, both the collection of good and bad things you did, called your karma. So if you did something good, you might get reborn in the next life as a king. If you did something bad, you might get reborn as a spider. Hindu ethics also were influenced by a belief that it was okay to have economic prosperity, called artha, and to have pleasure, which is called kama. And your dharma in Hinduism is your life's purpose. It's also a way of doing your caste duties. Depends on how you interpret it. As I said, Hinduism is polytheistic. Their books are the Vedas when the Aryans were there, and then the Aryans mixed with the Dravidians, and you get the Upanishads. You also have literature like the Mahabharata, which is a long story about a war between a family. One of the most important parts of that book is the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita is where we see Hinduism changing to embrace the idea that you can get to moksha by doing your dharma. There's also the Ramayana, which is a book about a man named Rama. Later, Hindu moralists are going to change the Ramayana to put more emphasis on Vishnu and Shiva being incarnations, or Rama as an incarnation of Vishnu. That's going to happen over time. Their architecture are temples where they pray. You're going to see the symbol Om, and they mostly taught in a sacred language called Sanskrit, which was unlike the vernacular spoken tongues. Now, Buddhism was started by a man named Siddhartha Gautama, who comes from a privileged class. Basically, he's going to make a lot of realizations about life, that there is death, that there is sickness, and he's going to wonder why that's so, and he's going to come to a belief that life is suffering, and that desire is the root of suffering, and that you can end suffering by basically something called the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So what you need to know, a big difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is how they use the word dharma. The dharma in Hinduism is your caste duties. In Buddhism, it's the basic teaching or doctrine, which is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. They also believe in samsara, which in Buddhism, which is the idea that you get born and die and get born again, but you can, instead of trying to get to moksha, they're trying to get to nirvana, which is spiritual liberation. And instead of the asceticism of Hinduism, they advocate a more moderate lifestyle. Eventually, Buddhism will change to embrace some big changes. They'll start to see some Buddhists, not all, the Buddha as a god. They'll embrace the idea of Buddhist saints called bodhisattvas. You can look at the others here and go back to chapter 9 because I'm going to run out of time.